Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, September 15th. Congressman Bill Keating is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. From securing funding for the Cape Bridges to meeting with the president of Ukraine, he has a lot of ground to cover, and so do we. It's time to go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to OTR. I'm Charmin Sacchetti.
And I'm Ed Harding. And as you can see with us at the table is Congressman Bill Keating this morning. He represents the state's 10th district, a member of Congress since 2011. It's great to see you, sir. Thank you for being here.
All right.
All right, let's get to the debate in a bit. But first, let's start with the dysfunction at the Capitol. You are just back from a month-long break in August, and the threat of a government shutdown is looming again right out the gate. The hard-right, razor-thin margin Republican majority pushing back against a budget deal. Do you think that Democrats are going to have to step in and keep the lights on? And if so, what are they willing to do to make that happen?
This is the third time just this term the government's about to be shut down for not funding it. If this was a local town or city in Massachusetts, they'd have a recall petition set for someone not doing their budget. And each time the Democrats have had to come in and bridge that gap, and they're going to have to do it again. This week we came in and they're in the majority. And this is important because I think people I talked with say, you people have to stop fighting with each other. They don't understand. This is not a fight between Democrats and Republicans on these budgets. This is a fight between Republicans and Republicans. They're in the majority. They fight each other.
So are Democrats going to have to step in? And
they're going to have to, as they have before. Now, this time, I think, perhaps September 30, we run out of money. The Senate is working, and they're going to come before we even come back this week. They're going to come back, hopefully, with a plan of their own. They'll be consulting with Democratic and Republican House leaders. Hopefully, we'll do that again. Now, one of the times we did this, it resulted in Speaker McCarthy losing his job for working with Democrats to keep our government open. So these are the stakes on that side, and it's just it's mind-boggling that they can't even get in control of their own budget themselves.
Let's look beyond the end of the month, and let's look to the early part of November. Do you think Democrats will flip the House in November?
I think if I were a betting person, I think the odds are better than 50-50 that would happen. So we'll see. We have so many races that are so close all around the country. It'll really result in turnout, but also I think I'm worried about what's happening in Georgia right now with local election officials. I'm worried where they're changing the rules, where even their governor and their Secretary of State are concerned about the local election people that are loyal to Donald Trump, frankly, and he praises them, saying that they're going to review the final term until they're satisfied with the review.
You're concerned
we don't
about
count folks like that in this country.
You're concerned about the fairness of the election.
I am, and I'm concerned about this delay because remember the attempt that Trump was trying to have occur across the country. He was trying to delay it enough so it went to the legislatures, and they would decide. So, we're really, our basic democracy, when we say it's threatened, we're going to be looking at these elections and hoping that they're done effectively. The last one was, but as recently as this debate between Trump and Harris, he was still denying that
he would not commit. You're absolutely
right. He would not commit that election was fair.
You segued us perfectly into the debate. So let's talk about the debate. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump meeting for the first and, as of right now, apparently the only time. It was during the past week. Harris widely seen as the winner. That was widely seen. That's not words from me. That is widely seen. What was your take on how she handled the former president?
Well, the interesting thing, with your viewership here in the show, it's political and politically interested people. I would say just about everyone that's watching this show saw the debate themselves. And I prefer to say, you saw it. You saw it. 58 million people saw it. They know what they saw. So in terms of who won the debate, people know. The other thing is, where does this take us after this? It didn't move the polls a great deal. These debates don't seem to do it. But they will affect down ballot races. And I do think the things that aren't emphasized now, like, people eating dogs and geese, and the things that aren't emphasized now are going to be the important things going forward. What Kamala Harris said about housing, what she said about small businesses.
What do you want to see from Harris now?
I want to see from our government right now a return to normalcy. And the chaos of another Trump term, but the seriousness of that. This isn't just, I think that, his rallies are like an old nightclub act gone bad. And people are wildly entertained somehow by that. But this is real going forward. She talked about some real issues that people care about. And that's what's going to propel the discussion, I hope, into the final election.
Did Democrats pull this back from the edge? In other words, after the Biden performance in the first debate with Donald Trump, does the change of candidates pull it back from the edge? Or the
Absolutely.
edge?
Yeah. I love Joe Biden, and he'll go down in history as a very transformative president. What he's done in Ukraine, what a coalition of over 50 countries putting together against a real threat to our security here. What he's done taking us out of COVID with the economy and avoiding a recession that every expert said was going to occur. So, but the reality was, you also have to be a campaigner, not just someone that had a record. And it was clear that was not working. And that transition absolutely changed the whole race.
Well, during the debate, former President Trump, he said he'd look for a negotiated end to the war in Ukraine. He declined to say if he wanted Ukraine to win. Now, you've traveled to Kyiv to speak to President Zelensky. When you saw him talk about the war in Ukraine and declined to say he wanted Ukraine to win, what did that say to you?
That's the greatest threat since World War II to our Western alliance, the transatlantic alliance that has brought us the greatest peace and security historically in modern times and the greatest prosperity. It's all threatened by this. People have to understand that the threat goes beyond Ukraine. In writing, the Russian Federation and Putin said before the attack, the more recent attack, that he was going to not stop Ukraine, that it was Estonia, it was the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Poland. So a couple of people...
So when you saw Trump say that, what did you think?
I couldn't believe he wouldn't commit to saying he wants to have Ukraine win. And here's something that no one paid much attention to, that he said during the debate, and he said before, and I'm puzzled by this, but I'm working through what it means. He said if he's elected, he is going to stop the war before he takes office. And what I think he means by that, and I've been thinking a lot about it, is he is going to take that point, should he be elected, and he's going to issue statements about where he's going, his movement away from NATO, he's pulling out of the alliance, and he thinks he's going to have Ukraine and our allies back down. His strategy, given that statement, is going to be, I'm going to pressure our allies. I'm going to pressure Ukraine. I'm not going to pressure Putin. And that's the only thing I can make of that statement.
Right.
And think about it. He's going against our own allies and our own self-interest, but he doesn't want to do it when he's in office. He's trying to effectuate that before.
Last week, Ukraine used drones to hit targets in Moscow, and they want permission to use long-range, Western-made weapons against Russia. You support that move, right? I mean, just yes or no?
I did.
Okay,
publicly.
So Putin says if those weapons are used, he will consider a NATO attack. What about escalation?
I just have to put it in perspective. Russia attacked Ukraine. They're defending themselves. Putin, as he does with so many things, is twisting it around that all of a sudden he's the victim. He's being attacked. That's not what is occurring. I believe I was one of the first Democrats to come out publicly and say we should be able to use longer range ATACMS, make sure they can go 200 miles for legitimate military targets. We can't be tying their hands behind their back. I've talked with the defense minister in the UK, the French defense minister. I've talked with our allies because of my positions that I'm in, off the record kind of discussions. And they want the ability to go further themselves. They're respecting the coalition, particularly U.S. opinion on this. So I think you'll see that change. I think it has to. But this is going to be a war of attrition to an extent. Putin is waiting to see what happens in our elections because of the statements of Donald Trump. Right. And he's also going to see if the coalition can hold together. I believe there'll be some give and take during this year, the calendar year. Russia's making some gains in the East right now.
You think Kamala Harris can, in fact, hold that coalition together?
Absolutely.
We're on the record with Congressman Keating. Stay with us.